Right, welcome to our official book launch. Basically what I want to do is I want to very briefly introduce the idea behind the book before passing on to our contributors. We are very happy because we have 6 of our contributors here today that are going to introduce their respective chapters and forward in the case of Rob. So very briefly, the main idea was pretty simple actually. It began with the observation that although research into consumer ethics has grown significantly over the last few decades, and there have been quite a few books actually on the subject matter, usually these books tend to approach questions around ethics and consumption from a single discipline. So what we wanted to do, in line also with our seminar series, was to foreground and in a way embrace a more interdisciplinary perspective by bringing these different disciplines in dialogue with each other and trying in a way to identify both issues of convergence but also questions around the differences and underlying contradictions. For example, today alone, we discussed briefly definitional issues. Michal was talking about how political consumerism within political science is viewed as something different than ethical consumerism on the basis that, if I'm not misquoting you, Michal, on the basis that political consumption can be both positive and negative, and it can be both democratic and less democratic, whereas ethical consumption has very much to do with the 3 pillars of sustainability. Likewise, during our exploration, we discovered other differences, such as, for example, the idea that sustainable consumption within some economic studies is not necessarily viewed as what we call green consumption, but has more to do with the idea of maintaining consistent levels of consumption across future generations. So sustainable consumption in some economic articles has very much to do with maintaining consumption rather than reducing it, which will be the predominant understanding in other disciplines. So that's to give you a very small flavor of the differences we identified at the definitional level, let alone other levels, including the different theoretical frameworks that are being employed in different disciplines, the different methodologies, the different underlying assumptions, and so on and so forth. So in a way, what we're trying to do in this book is interrogate these similarities and these differences, and hopefully also set some initial threads in the way of developing a more interdisciplinary and ideally transdisciplinary understanding of consumer ethics. So within the book we have 13 chapters, including disciplines such as philosophy, religious studies, economics, psychology, marketing, history, geography, sociology, anthropology, politics, urban sciences, education, and cultural studies. And we have organized them around 2 themes. The first theme has to do with consumer ethics and the individual, and the other theme has to do with consumer ethics and society. And as we explore today, and as you will be able to further explore in the book, of course this is a rather problematic distinction, but I'm not going to say more, not least because we want you to spend £70 and buy the book right here, right now. Right, so without any further delay, I'm passing on to Rob. Basically, we are going to follow the same sequence as in the book. So we will begin with Rob because Rob has written one of our 2 forewords, and then we will carry on with, I think, Karen, because you are next in the book, then Marylyn and Carmela, and then Dorothea, and then Joe. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Hey, hi everybody. I've heard it all, been talking all day, so I'm going to try and keep it short. I'm going to talk about 3 moments of inspiration. And the first moment, I've just set the scene a little bit, in that I come from ethical consumer, we're writers, researchers and campaigners in this space. We're not academics at all. And so we just kind of see you all as the same thing, or you're all just academics. And it was the first moment of inspiration, really, I think must have been Deirdre's or whoever put together this seminar series, because the idea of a cross-disciplinary approach was one of those to ethical consumption, was one of those ideas that once you look at it, it seems obvious, but at the time no one had really thought of it before. And I think it's obvious because the nature of ethical consumption itself is that it doesn't sit comfortably in any one discipline. And indeed, if it does spend too long in one discipline, it begins to doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't manage to take on all the characteristics that we know it had. So the first moment of inspiration was the seminar series, really, and I've been to most of them except one. And and the way that everyone fizzed off each other, you could see that something quite important was happening. So the cross-disciplinary idea, sitting in ethical consumption, was great. So the second moment of inspiration was to do a book, which of course, this is why we're here at the book launch. And and that was taking the idea of the seminar series, creating a book which kind of puts a marker in the ground, going interdisciplinary ethical consumption research. That's where it's at. That's where it's going to be in the future, and it's great. I won't say what's in the foreword because you can just read that. The third moment of inspiration was our own at Ethical Consumer, and we decided early on in the year, after talking to a lot of academics, to launch a journal called the Journal of Consumer Ethics in 2017, an interdisciplinary journal, inspired really both by this seminar series and and the book, and just watching what happened there. And in many ways, we said, Ethical Consumer publishes a popular journal, does research, a popular magazine, does research, haven't really got a lot of experience in journal publishing. However, and some people have said, are you quite the right people to publish this? We're not quite sure. But then thinking about it, the fact that we don't differentiate between all you academics and that we're not from one department means that actually we might be quite good at this, because we don't really see a distinction. Deirdre is going to have more information on her website about the Journal of Consumer Ethics. It's going to come out in first one about April, May 2017. We're looking for people who want to do reviews, want to help us out, want to join the editorial board, get in touch, speak to us. It's a bit of an experiment. We don't know if it's going to work. We've got some great content already lined up for the first issue. Tim Lang's going to be writing about unmanageable consumer. We're looking at classic text, revisited. Ian, we've just spoken to, is going to do something on Follow the Thing. And we've got someone writing about boycotts in Japan. And also, I can't help thinking that we're going to have a book review in it. Possibly, it might be this book. And so, if there is anyone here who isn't an author or who has written a foreword and wants to do a book review for this in Volume 1, Issue 1 of the Journal of Consumer Ethics, let me know after this. Cheers, everyone.
Right, hello, and I just want to, I'm Karen Wenell, I'm in Theology and Religion in Birmingham, and I just want to start by thanking the editors for a really wonderful volume that I shall be recommending to colleagues and students and anyone I can think of. I think it's really great conversation between different disciplines, and I think it's great for the study of religion to be part of that, so I really appreciated being part of this project. And also for the opportunity to come to Glasgow, where I lived for more than a decade, and it's a joy to come back to it. But I was also reflecting on Birmingham, where I've lived for 5 years now. And I was thinking that the only fair trade shop I know of in Birmingham city centre is at the Cars Lane Church, which is near the two train stations. And on its website, it lists opening hours as 10:30 to 2:30 Tuesday to Saturday, and there's a further note, it is also open on most Sundays after morning worship. And around the city on a Sunday, I imagine that I know that there are lots of other small and transient stalls for fair trade that appear after morning worship and disappear again until another Sunday sort of rolls along. The Carr's Church webpage also states that the shop is run and staffed solely by volunteers who are passionate about fair trade. And there's some interesting connections there. You've got a shop, a worshipping community, volunteers, and a passion for fair trade. And I think more than just passingly interesting, there's something going on here which is worthy of sustained academic engagement and study. And what I wanted to do in my chapter, or to show for this book, was that although religious identity is not separate and distinct from other senses of identity and motivation, there are particular religious resources that can be connected to the issues of ethical consumerism in really quite powerful ways. Things like text, sacred texts and stories, sacred spatialities, and senses of the whole group, which is often very global in nature. Religion has been called by some an original globalizer. It connects people across national and other boundaries. So this is an interesting thing to look at. And these sorts of resources can be motivating and formative for the actions of consumers for whom they hold this powerful relevance. Stories like that of the Good Samaritan, reflection on the term Trishna within Buddhism, consideration of the ethical implications of belonging to, say, the kingdom of God in Christianity or Ummah in Islam. These can all be drawn on as ways of relating to the sacred and working out what is required for belonging to a sacred community in ethical terms. What do you have to do to be part of this group, this collectivity? There's already important work on such issues, such as that of Deirdre Shaw, collective work of Cloak, Barnett, Clark and Malpass. And really participating in this project has inspired me to consider where there might be further work which can be done to kind of better understand these motivations of consumers who meaningfully draw on these religious resources in relationship to their practical activities. And I'm thinking I might even dabble in leading on some data collection, which is something I haven't really done in the past. And if it's a mistake, I may have to withdraw my debt of gratitude for my inspiration for this, but we'll see how it goes. But I really do believe that it's important to build up our understanding of the complexities and distinctive contributions that these perspectives make to our wider understanding, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary understandings in terms of motivations and practices of ethical consumerism. So I'm, again, really grateful to the editors for having that perspective of bringing in different voices, and I think this is the way forward, so hope it all continues. Thank you.
So I have to first of all confess, not confess that I'm Marylyn, I'm Marylyn Carrigan, and I've done the chapter on marketing. But I have to confess that I'd forgot Deirdre asked me to do this, so I'm going to wing it. So I'm based at the Centre for Business and Society in Coventry, and I've written the chapter with my colleague Carmela about marketing ethics and consumer ethics, or the challenges of marketing ethics and consumer ethics, which is no small task to offer an overview of that, considering ever since I've been working in academia, we've been wrestling with those problems. So what I've tried to do in the chapter with Carmela is to overview some of the approaches that marketers take, to overview some of the approaches that consumers take, and also highlight the conflicts and tensions between those, because marketers are always looking for consumers to make the moves, and consumers are always looking for marketers to make the moves. And I think one of the biggest problems I've certainly had with this topic and with my career and being a professor of marketing is that a lot of what I kind of advise is that we do less of it, which sits very awkwardly with other mainstream marketers who are trying to encourage us to buy more stuff. So what the chapter is really about is to try and unpick some of the challenges that we all face, whether we're a corporate or a consumer. And it ends on a note of, which even though we were trying to discuss that today and not finding very many solutions, the idea that we maybe optimistically could embed with our work the idea that we should be consuming less but consuming better. And I think that's the note that I end on, but the chapters, the discussion of where really research And also just everyday shopping has taken us to the point that we're at just now, where we recognise that we really can't go on the way we've been going for the last 30 or 40 years. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dorothea Kleine and I'm a geographer at Sheffield University. I feel incredibly proud to have been given the opportunity to represent a discipline which I love and care about in the context of a field which has always inspired me to think beyond my discipline. And I think this book is extremely timely, and also the process of producing this book has been one of great inspiration and also very thought-provoking for my own work and hopefully also for colleagues. I'm going to give you a quick flavour of what's in my specific chapter, which effectively is just an overview of some of the contributions that geography has done, plus some kind of specific themes that I think are kind of going on as kind of directions for future research. So at the moment in geography, we have a sort of rich variety of engagements, like environmental sustainability discussions, labour conditions discussions, human rights, health and safety risks, animal welfare, organic production, and then lots and lots of kind of fair trade. So at Royal Holloway, University of London, where I was previously, I was actually teaching an entire course in a geography department on fair trade. At the same time, geography uses as a key disciplinary item, as a concept, notions of space, but not just of space, but also place, location, locale, sense of place, and so on. And if you'd like to delve a little bit more deeply into those, I've tried to do a little bit of definitional work in the chapter. My own sort of thinking in this area has been strongly influenced by Doreen Massey's work on relational space, and there's several of us who have kind of been using those ideas, and that means that space is something, thinking about space relationally is something that makes us think about space in relational terms, and thinking about the direction, for instance, of gaze, the direction of power across space. It's against essentialist narratives that put little kind of borderlines between around spaces and thinks more about the interconnectedness. But it also thinks about cultural specificity, and I think that's something that the ethical discourse overall, the ethical consumption discourse overall could benefit from. We think we talk too often about the ethical consumer or ethical consumers more generally, and we need to think more culturally specifically about what we mean by that. Geographers have also shown that there are several socioeconomic transactions that are outside kind of classic market models of understanding the economy. So I'm thinking here of the work of J.K. Gibson Graham, who have done a fantastic job in geography documenting alternatives to sort of the dominant relationship of capitalist market relations. And I think that is another thing that kind of comes through strongly from geography, is the idea of documenting alternatives. Because geography's got a strong tradition of doing geography in different parts of the world, there are several themes that explore ethical consumption beyond the global north. And there's several colleagues that I also sort of review and point to in the book there. There's a theme that explores producer spaces, a theme that explores consumer spaces, and potentially most interesting, a theme that explores the linkages in between, or indeed, more recently, south-south connections, so southern producers and southern consumers coming together. Something that has changed our thinking in that respect is that the digital revolution, if you want to call it that way, has made it easier to actually follow traces of products and see the online shadows of products and trace them. And so whether it's my own work on fair tracing or Ian Cook's work on Follow the Thing, we have benefited very strongly as geographers from these data traces that are now available, where we can tell our students to go and trace the origins of a product online, for instance, to a degree. And the absences are just as interesting as the visibilities of those online shadows. So turning then to current trends, within geography, just a few that I detected, and I did send it out for peer review to some other geographers to find out what else they saw. Things that we came up with was definitely the debate about scaling up, and specifically linking there into questions of procurement, both by companies but also the public sector. The role of celebrities in the discussion of ethical consumption. Interestingly, in my own work, for instance, there was Jamie Oliver's work on school meals in the global north and in the UK had also been viewed in Brazil. So we actually found Jamie Oliver in focus groups in Brazil. Yet another example of how, in relational terms, these ideas travel. So we are kind of seeing also discursive links between the global north and south. Another trend, I think, is the drive towards greater traceability, and what that means, not just companies tracing consumer behavior, but also the potential for consumer activism using traceability. In generally, I'd say there are maybe three things that geography as a discipline can contribute specifically to this field and the practice of doing ethical consumption. Firstly, there's this strong theme of action research, of collaboration with activists, and an acceptance in the geography community for that as acceptable forms of research. And there's pioneers like Gibson Graham who've made that possible. Secondly, there is within geography, comparatively to other disciplines, freedom to publish in different avenues. So we do not yet have a fixed list of high-ranking journals or something like that forces us down a particular disciplinary line, though we constantly have to be vigilant against that because those pressures also exist in my discipline. And then thirdly, there's some real commitment to change in geography as a whole. So it's, in a sense, it's okay within geography to not just trace the world as it is, but also to discuss things that might be and being committed to shaping the future. So these are things that I'm sure geography is not unique in, but these are things that I find particularly endearing about geography, make me passionate about it, and make me then passionate to engage in an interdisciplinary field. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name's Cheryl Littler. I work in sociology at City University in London, but I wrote the chapter on cultural studies in this book. And broadly what it tried to do is to think about how cultural studies could bring certain tools to the table to theorise and interpret ethics and morality in consumption. So what I did was talk about how cultural studies has always had an investment in transdisciplinarity and anti-disciplinarity, in kind of ripping up the disciplinary rule book to some extent and just taking the tools that seem necessary for the interpretive work that's needed at that particular moment. And then I talked about the conjuncture again and what that means, which, as I talked about that earlier, I won't repeat myself here and bore you. But I tried to discuss it with reference to gender in particular, because I'm quite interested in the relationship between gender and consumption, and in particular in how consumption has in the West and the North been a zone of kind of ambiguous empowerment for women, and it's been a place where that neoliberal capitalism has kind of drawn from the second wave feminist movement to sell women an idea of consumption as empowerment. And I'm kind of interested in how when people critique that, often gender gets thrown out in the process. So I'm kind of interested in how there's an alternative history that you might map of anti-consumerism involvement, women's involvement in anti-consumerism activity. So you might think, for example, about the kind of work that housewives have done around boycotts, whether that's through the work of Baby Milk Action with their anti-Nestle boycott, or through the kind of civil rights campaigns around Don't Buy Where You Can't Work. So that's what I tried to do to a large extent in the chapter. And then I end up by talking a bit about ethics and morality and their status in cultural studies. So ethics has kind of been picked apart to some extent, as well as having a meaning of kind of morality. It's also got this Foucauldian meaning of behaviour and just kind of behavioural practices. So I looked at some of the differences around that, and then tried to think a bit about how morality has been critiqued as well. So morality in the sense of moralising has been quite heavily critiqued by different writers in cultural studies. But at the same time, there are arguments that whilst it's important not to be moralising and sanctimonious, it is important to retain a dimension of morality, of ethics and political action. So thank you to the editors for putting together such an interesting transdisciplinary work. Thanks.
So it's me again. I guess I just want to thank our contributors, because the book really is as good as the individual contributions, and we are very, very extremely thankful for putting so much work in making sure that your individual chapters are so much worthwhile. From our side as editors, I guess all we can say is that we are very much committed in terms of continuing with this attempt to develop an interdisciplinary understanding. And as I mentioned earlier, our next seminar is definitely going to be transdisciplinary, as flamboyant as this sounds. And please do carry on checking our website for further updates, because we are committed to be doing much more in this area. Thank you all again for your excellent contributions.